Garth's hectic schedule touring provided him the perfect cover.
Yeah.
To be able to, assuage essentially his bloodlust. So he's at the Super Bowl in LA in January of '93. He's on the Howard Stern show in September. He's at the Country Music Awards in Nashville. And the event that got me a little spooked, earlier on, there was a cluster of disappearances that occurred in 1993. And you had a circumstance where Zawicki, she disappears. And there was a witness that saw her interacting with the individual shortly before she disappeared. Like the last person seen talking to her was someone whose physical description matched Garth to a T. In conjunction with the circumstantial evidence, because with respect to the investigation as to geographical proximity, I identified there's over 80 unalivings and 120 missing person cases.
This is just who I am.
No, you don't want to be a bad guy, no. I mean, you look like a good guy,
Okay, I guess. I'd rather kill somebody.
Oh, you would?
That'd be fun, sure.
Oh, so he must have this hidden mean streak that we can't see.
I went to work with her that summer. Welcome back, Pete Rausini, my friend. How you doing?
Fine. Thank you for having me back.
I know everybody is probably wondering what the hell I'm doing wearing a cowboy hat. We're going to jump right into it here and clear this up because you and our mutual good friend, Matt Cox, has set the internet ablaze here with stories about one of country music's finest, Garth Brooks, and some secrets that he may have. Tell us all about this, Pete.
Well, hello, my name is Pierre Rausini, and I'm not here to talk about money laundering or drug trafficking or crypto. Instead, I'm here to discuss a cultural phenomenon. What began as a dark secret in one of the darkest corners of the internet has turned into one of the strangest allegations ever made against an American celebrity. The book I co-authored investigating the allegations strongly suggests that the artist is, in fact, a monster. The name of the book is Bodies in Low Places. And of course, as you indicated, the subject of the book is Garth Brooks.
Right. So obviously a play on one of his hit songs, Friends in Low Places. And correct me if I'm wrong, the first time I ever heard of this was from a comedian. I think Tom Segura brought it up. And then after that, this thing has just kind of caught fire. When was the first time this crossed your radar?
I was at the halfway house.
Okay.
When my buddy Matt, he and I were in prison. We collaborated on writing a number of stories together.
Right.
And he'd mentioned the fact of, Tom Segura, who I'd never heard of, or this particular meme of which I'd never heard of. And quite frankly, at the beginning, I was like, what the hell? You have to understand, I got transported by the U.S. Marshals to the Federal Detention Center in California to answer charges in 1997.
Right.
I returned to society in the spring of 2023. So I was gone for 25 years. And so I was an outsider kind of viewing what was going on in our country. It was like an interesting perspective because I'm essentially was stuck like in a time capsule. And so when I returned, I'm still shocked over how so many people in our country have just lost their effing minds. And when Matt brought this to me, I was like, this is just another manifestation of that same phenomenon I had been observing from prison. And so initially it was like, I was, of course, very skeptical because, look, I grew up in Los Angeles. No one in my circle listened to Garth Brooks. However, I was 22 when he exploded to a level of superstardom.
Right.
That's when Rope in the Wind came out.
Mm-hmm.
And, you couldn't turn anywhere without having Brooks. He's like, the first country singer to ever, have a new album reach Billboard top, he's number one on the Billboard charts. Never been done before by a country star. And so, I was familiar. That was my era of his rise to superstardom. And, this guy achieved a level of success that has been unparalleled. I mean, he sold more albums than Elvis, than the Beatles. I mean, I got it right here. He sold like 170 million albums. He's got over countless awards. And so when I returned when I was at the halfway house and this theory gets brought to my attention, and it's formally known as the Garth Brooks serial killer theory. Mm-hmm. When this theory gets brought to my attention, I'm like, how's this? Like, what the hell has happened to my country? You got people thinking that the earth is flat. You got people thinking that the moon landing was staged. Now you got people thinking Garth Brooks is a serial unaliver. Like, what the hell's going on? And so it was shocking, but also very illuminating. Like the first time I'd ever, like I said, I was gone for 25 years. The first time I ever saw a TikTok was actually one of the kids at the halfway house showing me how to navigate, essentially. And he's pulling up these videos, and I saw this squirrely looking guy, kind of like a Grizzly Adams, white, big burly white guy with bushy hair. Looked kind of like a bit of a biker. And his face is like right in the screen, and he's yelling, "Where are the bodies, Garth? Where are the bodies?" I'm just like, oh my God. This is nuts. And it's like, so they took me like on Garth's social media. You look at the comments, it's just one accusation after another. In fact, I even printed some of them out here. And it's just like, like Sophia Elise says, "Garth, please, I haven't seen my family in months." Michael Ragusa, "Gee, please, where is my family?" Here's another one. "Mr. Brooks, please, even if you can't change what you did, you can at least give those families closure. Where are the bodies, Garth?" And so, for me, I'm looking at this as one, it provided an opportunity for me to write a satirical piece. This is how I began. Like, I don't want you thinking I came into this thing thinking I'm going to prove Garth Brooks is a serial unaliver. Right. On the contrary, I assigned a prior probability of him being what they were claiming he was, essentially a zero. Like, you can't eliminate the possibility of anything, but I was 99.9% on Garth's side. Right. At the beginning. And so I started reviewing this massive material, and I'm thinking, you know what? There are literally millions of views, thousands of comments. Like, this is of widespread interest. And so I saw this as an opportunity for me for Matt and I, because he was the one pressing for it. Right. Like, for me, I was already working on other stories. Like, I mainly focused on true crime. Like, I'm in the midst of writing one story, researching the next one. You wanted to take a detour to do this. And I'm like, this is, this isn't what we normally do. But he's like, no, you understand. Like, he was treating it somewhat seriously. And for Matt, like, the criteria he uses to select stories is whether it's going to be fun to write. Right. Like, he's so self-absorbed and narcissistic. Like, he's not worried about the reader. Like, how much fun is he going to have writing it? That's the filter. And so I was like, but look, he's got very good judgment. Yeah. And so I'm like, all right, I agreed to I got roped into this project, essentially. And so I saw it initially as an opportunity for me to write a satirical piece examining, our culture's obsession with celebrity and, the impact of social media on our collective storytelling. Right. Particularly bringing the perspective of someone that was gone for 25 years. When I left, it was still Windows 95. My Motorola flip phone was a state of the art. My laptops had Pentiums in it. And so when I returned, it's an entirely different world. And I thought that the time capsule perspective would be interesting. Mm-hmm. And so that's what led as the prelude to my having begun the investigation.
Okay. Now, when you start to do this investigation, obviously what Tom had kind of mentioned was when you follow along with his tour dates, you could find some nefarious things that happen along the way. Is that where you guys started, or where did you initially start while doing your investigative work for this piece?
Well, according to the theory, Garth's hectic schedule touring provided him the perfect cover.
Yeah.
To be able to, assuage essentially his bloodlust. And once the theory was originally brought to my attention, I'm looking to discount it at every opportunity. And one of the things that Matt had kept focusing on was the existence of this list. He's like, we got to find a list. Because, Segura had constantly, and by that point, I'd already seen the Segura clips. I'd familiarized myself with a bunch of the material. And so I started searching for this list, and I wasn't able to locate it. I'm thinking, like, look, there is no factual predicate there, which is going to support my wanting to do a satirical piece.
Right.
So then, but I was at the halfway house, relatively bored. And so I started doing just simple open record searches, essentially. And I, not really being familiar with Brooks and his story, I started like identifying objectively verifiable facts. Like he had a world tour in 93 and 94. He had a world tour in 96, 97 into 98. He retired in 2000. Like I didn't even know the guy had retired. Then he came back. He did residencies in Las Vegas. So I started identifying, okay, tours, 93, 94, tours, 96 to 98, tours, 2014 to 17. Like all these different tours, his different residencies. I identified all of the shows. So he's at the Super Bowl in LA in January of 93. He's on the Howard Stern show in September. He's at the Country Music Awards in Nashville. So you start placing him in all of these locations. This is information that you could discover relatively easily, just a lot of time on Google, essentially. And so from there, I started cross-referencing, searching for either unalivings that are unsolved or missing person cases. And the event that got me a little spooked earlier on was there was a cluster of disappearances that occurred in 1993. And it was like in short order. It was, Garth's in Indianapolis, boom, woman comes up missing. Shortly thereafter, he's in Chicago for 3 nights at the Rosemont Horizon, boom, boom, boom. It's like, there's literally this whole cluster of Indianapolis, Chicago, Cincinnati. And it's like, initially, look, I bring more of a, I'm how can I say this? I've been diagnosed with Asperger's, I'm on the spectrum, and I don't think in neurotypical terms. I'm much more comfortable thinking statistically, and basically what I use is a Bayesian approach. And so my prior probability that I assigned at the outset was essentially a 0. And then with Bayesian, you start adding evidence and you start modifying, updating your belief. And so once you start getting these type of clusters, all of a sudden it's like, well, what is the probability of these events occurring if the hypothesis is true? And then if the hypothesis is false. So you have what are essentially competing hypotheses at the outset. And so I began doing this. And so by the time I began finding 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, 1 there, well, it's like, and I'm reporting this to Matt, like, hey man, this is actually coming back a little quick. And Matt's going nuts. I'm telling you, bro, he's a fucking monster. He's like, keep digging. And so, by the time I transferred to home confinement, there's like over a dozen unalivings that are literally, circumstantially of concern because they have both temporal proximity and geographical proximity. And the one that really tipped it over the scale was the disappearance of a young woman named Tammy Zawicki. And the Zawicki abduction is the one that, I had chills going down my spine because with respect to Zawicki, she disappeared while on the tour route. And the Brooks tour convoy had stopped. And you had a circumstance where Zawicki was like, she disappears. And there was a witness that saw her interacting with the individual shortly before she disappeared. Like the last person known seen talking to her was someone whose physical description matched Garth to a T. I'm talking race, weight, height, hair color. Remember, this is Garth 30 years ago, much younger man, of
Right.
course. But and it was like, wow, this is the wiki abduction was the one that said, okay, this is going to require us to dig deeper, but in a more structured way. It can't just simply be me Googling. Like, we have to, create a format so that way we can essentially test. We have to create a data set whose results are going to be valid.
Right.
And so that's how the story shifted from my original idea of it being commentary concerning, our cultural obsession with celebrity and collective storytelling in the age of social media, to actually investigating whether or not Garth is a serial unaliver.
Right. And was this like a known case? Did it get a lot of press?
No. Well, look, it's just one unfortunate individual disappearing, and then subsequently, she was found unalive.
Right.
And so you've got a number of, people weren't associating them with Garth. And so it's, one of the individuals that provided a lot of insight that Matt was able to participate with respect to the writing of the book was a retired FBI agent named Jim DiOrio.
Right.
A highly decorated agent, spent 3 decades with the Bureau. And he's the one who explained that the FBI is very well aware of what they refer to as mobile alibi crimes. That, in fact, 15 years ago, they even created a task force targeting essentially truck drivers, because this happens frequently. People come missing at truck stops and things of that nature. Yeah. And given
the was a big one that done that. Truck driver.
Given the transient nature of the drivers and the no connection with the individuals, it's very difficult to investigate.
Yep.
And so he's the one who broke down, like, yes, well, assuming Garth is guilty, then this is what he's doing. This is it. It really shed light into the psychology of the mobile alibi type serial offender.
Because when you're able to do that, right, when you're able to kind of use your travel as your cover, essentially you're hiding, but you're doing it in plain sight in front of everybody. You look back at like guys like BTK. I want to say he was something like a person that would go around the neighborhoods and, write people citations for this, that, and the other. So it gave him the cover of going around the neighborhood. He could be snooping around the house and nobody would be a second look, because that was his job. Check on things, make sure the houses are pressure washed, grass is cut, bushes are trimmed, things of that nature. So when he's bouncing to all these places, he's essentially able to hide, but do it in plain sight in front of everybody.
Well, sure. That's part of, well, look, with respect to the investigation into the veracity of the allegations, because that was the purpose of the book, is to examine the allegations.
Right.
And so you identified the circumstantial evidence, which is the temporal and physical proximity, along with respect to the Zwicky case, the witness testimony identifying someone consistent with Garth's, physical features. Well, separate from that, you also had what are essentially the psychological anomalies, because Garth exhibits a number of behavioral traits that are consistent with behavioral traits exhibited by very famous serial unalivers. And one of the ones that you referenced, and part of the book, is a breakdown of those traits and how you like a compare and contrast between, for instance, Ted Bundy,
right,
and Garth, John Wayne Gacy and Garth, Jeffrey Dahmer. You're talking about like Dennis Rader.
Dennis Rader, yep.
Right, okay, a real famous one. Joseph D'Angelo. Well, these are individuals who are able to compartmentalize their activity. And this is where, I did a lot of the research with respect to the psychological literature. And, the FBI's got a lot of material that's publicly available to analyze, to try to get a sense of what these traits are. And Matt was able to persuade 2 very highly respected criminologists, like 2 very big psychs, to share their insights. And so the full compare and contrast with respect to Garth and the psychological anomalies is a key element of the case. And so, for instance, what you're talking about is called dissociative disorder. It's a split personality.
Right.
And, a number of these guys are famous. John Wayne Gacy was very similar to Garth in that he was a respected member of the community activist. He was, essentially loved in his area of Chicago.
Mhm.
Well, turns out he was a monster who was unaliving individuals, burying people on his property. So he was able to compartmentalize that aspect. One of the other gentlemen we're referring to, he was a police officer. Well, on the one hand, he's a police officer with a wife and kids and family. On the other hand, he's off doing what he was doing. And so you see this repeatedly. And this is behavior consistent with Garth, particularly because the event that put Garth under the microscope essentially was an episode referred to as the creation of the Chris Gaines alter ego. And I didn't even, of course, like I said, I was away when all of this happened, but the Chris Gaines alter ego is, put it this way, Joe Rogan called it, what did he say? Rogan called it one of the greatest train wrecks in pop culture history. And for the audience that doesn't know, in 1999, at the pinnacle of his career, Garth suddenly came out essentially with an entirely different persona.
Yeah.
So he went from being, the country music star to being this dark, brooding, alternative rocker with this elaborate backstory. He was an Australian. He, thrill-seeking, fast women, fast cars, had a sex addiction. He, and what was shocking, like he appears at this press conference in his Chris Gaines persona.
Yeah.
He's got a, dark black wig. He's got, eyeliner, mascara on. He's, he's got a soul patch. He's speaking with an Australian accent. People are like, what the hell is this guy doing?
I vaguely remember that. I remember when he come out with the Chris Gaines album, and I remember him doing all that. But just that in of itself, for somebody to do that, like you said, at the pinnacle of their career, is so different and so strange and so out of the box. But then again, that other persona, like he's got this deep-seated alternative lifestyle that he wants to live or let out, and that's it. That's it.
Yeah, well, look, the creation of the Chris Gaines alter ego is a crucial piece of the psychological forensic evidence, essentially, because it demonstrates that he is able to not only compartmentalize, but that he was, it was the dark, brooding nature of the character, and he literally lived it. He performed as Chris Gaines. Garth's a right-handed guitar player. Well, when he's playing music for Chris Gaines, he's playing left-handed because the character was left-handed. Like, he didn't break character. There's documentaries made about this. And so the guy, and so it was like, this is the demonstration of someone who has essentially a split personality.
Yeah.
And this is the key characteristic behavioral trait that is consistent with so many of the serial offenders. People viewed the Chris Gaines persona as artistic whim. Well, I didn't see it that way at all. Like, to me, this was, a distinct second personality that was a manifestation of a private psychological reality. Like this, to me, this was a confession hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
And of course, at the time, the theory hadn't yet been propounded. It's only when you take the behavioral traits in conjunction with the alter ego, in conjunction with the circumstantial evidence, because with respect to the investigation as to temporal and the geographical proximity, I identified there's over 80 unalivings and 120 missing person cases.
It's hard to ignore those kind of numbers, man. I mean,
yes, and here's the thing: it's not as if that's a filtered data set. So if there was an event that took place while Garth was in, Memphis, well, if the we reviewed open records, we reviewed digital archives, and secured public record requests. Well, it's if there's any evidence indicating that the police believed it was gang related, that didn't go into the pot. Anything to do with a description of an assailant that didn't match Garth's didn't go in the pot.
That's good because you can't. People. That's the first thing people say is, "Oh, it could have been anything." So if you
No, this is the 80 are individuals that we couldn't exclude. The 120 missing persons are individuals that, again, couldn't be excluded. And so that creates, when you start adding each piece of the evidence, the probability begins to grow, and it's growing and it's growing. And now you take that in conjunction with not only the circumstances surrounding the temporal and geographical proximity, but now you take that in consideration with the behavioral traits and the psychological anomalies. It begins to create essentially a mosaic where each individual piece of evidence you could dismiss, but when you put together as a mosaic, you can't ignore it. When considered, how can I say this? When combined, the cumulative probability of all these seemingly unrelated events being coincidences becomes statistically virtually impossible.
Right.
And
I mean, it's like one of them things that everybody, like you said, when you first got into this, you probably laughed it off. But then when you start digging deep, this thing has really got some legs. And one of the things that you and I corresponded back and forth and prep for this, right? And a lot of times you'll see that serial killers, oftentimes they keep souvenirs from their victims. If anybody watches the show Dexter, which is a great television show, they actually just put the sequel just wrapped up. For I guess that would be considered a sequel because they had Resurrection. Now they had one where he was in New York. It's a great show, but every time he had a victim, he would cut him on the face, take a little droplet of blood and put it between two glasses and then put it in a box. So like the blood droplet would be his souvenir. So if you look, and not that there's obviously more, I don't know, you might have to count them up, but like you start thinking what could be his souvenirs that he would keep. And then I heard one guy start going over song titles. And when you listen to some of these song titles and you start, the river, somewhere other than the night, what she's doing now, unanswered prayers. I mean, shameless, thunder rolls. I mean, maybe you can even put together that, these songs were written from certain instances of this. I mean, it's really wild. It's a really dark rabbit hole.
Well, another key aspect of the theory centered around his property in Nashville. For the first couple of years, he was, a struggling musician.
Right.
He's working at a boot barn. And see, here's the thing. Like, he started at Oklahoma. He was a student at Oklahoma State University. And there was the first two unalivings taking place there. Then he moves to Nashville. Then you get a series of unalivings while he's in Nashville. Then he starts achieving a measure of success.
Right.
And so like for the first tour was 93, 94, the world tour, but the earlier, they weren't so much tours as he was on the county fair circuit. And so I had to identify all the county fair stops and then again, cross-reference that with missing persons, unsolved unalivings, where we couldn't exclude Garth as a suspect. And one of the first things that Garth did, and it's a key element of the theory, was unlike most artists, when they achieve a measure of success, they're going to go buy a beautiful house, they're going to go buy a fancy car, you made it. It's time to enjoy the fruits of all of that work. Well, Garth didn't do that. He went and he bought property, a large property, like 300 acres. And the theory is, and this is ultimately the property that he built his house on later on. And so there are various aspects of the hypothesis where Garth is actually using that property to store the individuals that are unalived or disappeared. And so, yes,
Gacy-esque. Gacy done similar things.
yeah, well, that's why. So it's we of course don't know, but if someone were to go and take a look, from my analysis of it, the house is big enough. Like if it had like a subterranean level, he could probably fit 300.
Wow. And even in Gacy's situation, like there was reports that like when he would have these cookouts and stuff, the neighbors and everybody would complain about the smell that was coming and emitting from the house. But I'm pretty willing to bet you Garth's probably got a lot of land around his house. He doesn't have any immediate neighbors. He's not in a subdivision.
Sure, no, it's a 300-acre property.
Yeah. So, even if there is a bit of a smell, nobody's going to smell that for a ways away.
Yeah. And so again, that's one of the behavioral traits that was inconsistent with someone in his position. Instead of buying the house or buying something, expensive, moving up essentially, he secured this property. And part of the theory is that he secured that property because he was having a problem with respect to disposal. He needed a place where he could park. You said you wanted to have a souvenir. Well, he just parks the individual there.
Right.
And so that's yet another one of the factors. I don't consider it particularly compelling. It's simply one data point. I go more with the statistical numbers with respect to the ever increasing likelihood, but it is certainly an issue with respect to conventional wisdom that yes, the property is being used to house individuals that he had unalived.
So a lot of these characteristics that, some of these people represent, like narcissism and stuff like that, where do you see him on the scale of the narcissism, the lack of empathy, things along those lines? Because a lot of them have those key characteristics and key traits. That's kind of almost all of them. If you go down the list, like you said earlier, Bundy, the BTK, the Salvo, all of them kind of have that same theme with them all. Where does Garth fit?
Well, so for instance, here I have with respect to narcissism, Garth's larger than life persona and relentless drive for success could be seen as narcissistic.
Right.
According to one of the experts, Dr. Cachet, pursuing a career in entertainment aligns with narcissistic traits. Grandiosity and a need for admiration are key dark triad traits. Well, Garth has exhibited those in spades. Lack of empathy. While Garth's music is full of emotion, the crimes he's suspected of having committed strongly suggest a chilling lack of empathy. Now, where things get a little suspect about Garth is he is too quick to start demonstrating, he's always quick to start crying.
Right.
And when you see that repeatedly. And so he's carrying off as if he deeply cares. And look, it comes off as contrived. It comes off as being staged. He has a carefully crafted image. It's well known that he's a control freak with respect to every aspect of his show. And so that need for control, that need for managing his image are all consistent with dark triad traits and consistent with the traits that are present oftentimes within serial offenders. So for instance, Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was the poster boy for charming unalivers. Handsome, articulate, and disarmingly polite. He used his charisma to lure his victims and evade suspicion for years. Does that sound familiar? Who else is very charismatic? Bundy was a master manipulator. Garth, likewise, is a superstar who can sell out stadiums with his charm and relatability. Okay, his fans don't just like him, they love him. And so among serial offenders, narcissism manifests as a craving for attention and a belief in their exceptionalism. Well, that's Garth. John Wayne Gacy was the ultimate double life serial offender. As we indicated earlier, he's a successful businessman, community volunteer. At night, sadistic unaliver, taking the individuals, burying them on his property. Well, likewise, Garth presents himself as a family man, known for his philanthropy, known for his wholesome image. Well, that's classic John Wayne Gacy behavior.
Yeah. He's got everything but owning the Kentucky Fried Chickens.
Jeffrey Dahmer, meticulous unaliver. His precision and attention to detail allowed him to evade suspicion for years. In short, Dahmer was a perfectionist who took pride in his work. Garth, likewise, is a perfectionist. Spends hours perfecting every note of his music, every detail of his performances. Like if Garth applied the same level of detail to satisfying his urges, his darker urges, it's no wonder that he hasn't been caught yet. And so as you go through every one of these unalivers, and we have case studies breaking down the characteristics of Dahmer, Gacy, Bundy, comparing and contrasting that with Garth. And so that bolsters the claims being made vis-a-vis the circumstantial evidence with respect to the proximity and temporal elements of the theory.
And with, like you said, the aspects of his show and stuff like that, like Garth was one of the first people coming up that I remember that going to their concert became more than just going to hear somebody sing. I mean, he was one of the first persons or people that I seen that got suspended on ropes and was flying over the crowds, and he's, playing the guitar while he's doing it. I mean, it became a spectacle. It was something more than just a concert with him. And I personally have seen Garth in concert here in Charleston. I don't know if that made the list that anybody, disappeared down here. This was a couple years ago, back around in February. But the interesting thing and why I bring that up was, and this is also something that could be useful if this is indeed, something that's going on. He booked a Saturday show and it sold out. Then he booked a Friday show. It sold out. He booked a later Saturday and Friday show and a Sunday show, and it sold out. So what does that say? Obviously, people want to hear him sing. He's a very popular musician, but now it's give him 3 days, maybe 4, depending on when he gets there, to be in the area, maybe case a little bit. And let's be honest, no matter the city and no matter the area, there's going to be areas where people are going to be, on the streets, whether it's streetwalkers, prostitutes, whatever, people that if you do snag off the street are not going to go missing, and not very many people are going to care about them, sadly. So it's really prime pickings for somebody that has that kind of time on their hands, because what else are they going to do?
Sure. And that's one of the insights shared by the FBI agent, because he indicated that the earlier set appeared to be individuals that Garth had observed. We did a lot of the studying had to do with the psychological profiles of known serial offenders. Well, in addition to those, I also prepared one concerning one of the famous serial offenders from film, Hannibal Lecter, from Silence of the Lambs. Oh, yeah. And although it's a fictional character, many elements of the character were actually drawn from actual serial unalivers. And he made an interesting statement towards when he was helping Agent Starling, the character played by Jodie Foster. And he said that, we covet what we see. And so the original premise with respect to the Oklahoma State unaliving when Garth was in college centered around these were individuals he would have had access to.
Yeah.
He was on campus. He also worked as a bouncer at a popular bar. Students are coming in, giving IDs to check, make sure they're 21. He can see their address. So he has that level of...
And he can probably spot if they're leaving out pretty hammered, inebriated. He knows if they're, probably not all together.
And so so we now from there's a transition to later on. And this is where the FBI agent says, look, assuming Garth is responsible for these, there's a transition where he's going from the individuals who he could covet because he has interactions with to now individuals that he's becoming much more selective in the targets.
Yeah.
Which goes back to your point, because now it's individuals that can't be tied back to him.
Yes. In no way.
He said that as he began to perfect his craft, he began to develop.
And to me, if that's your route, not that I'm condoning any of this behavior, true or not true, but I think that's the better route because it cuts off anything. Because let's be honest, when somebody goes missing in college, what's the first thing they do? They reach out to family, friends, anybody that had association with them. And it's not always the case that happens. You take, for instance, the Idaho, Brian Koberg or whatever, that guy didn't have any association with them people. I think he had seen them and maybe he might have, stalked them for a little bit, but I don't think any of them knew him. So, I mean, that's kind of, to me, better if you're looking to get away with it, to choose somebody you have absolutely no association with. That way you wouldn't even possibly be questioned if they disappeared.
Sure. There was one incident involving, he was in LA to appear on the Howard Stern show. And then that night, a woman just came up missing, like you said, drunk, stumbling out of a nightclub, disappeared. And, and her vehicle was located found in close proximity to Garth's. Mm. And so you had these repeated circumstance, and it's just like, wow, it's look, like I said, at the start of the investigation, the prior probability of Garth being a serial offender was, for all intents and purposes, 0. Like, this was my baseline assumption. However, as we began to introduce evidence one piece at a time, I began updating my prior belief. And so, like, the example I have is, think of it like this. The chance of a single specific event, like a person disappearing from a town on the same day Garth was performing there, might be slim. Say 1 in 1,000. It's weird, but it could be a coincidence. But when we layer in a second unrelated but similarly suspicious event, a different disappearance, different town, close proximity, the probability of it being a coincidence doesn't simply double. It becomes 1 in 1,000 multiplied by 1 in 1,000. That's a staggering 1 in a million. The statistical beauty of Bayesian analysis is that with each new piece of evidence, that initial near zero baseline probability is not just nudged, it's multiplied. We've documented over 80 unsolved unalivings and 120 plus missing person cases that have circumstantial links to Garth's concerts, tours, and residence. With each event, the probability that Garth's a serial offender doesn't just increase, it explodes. The denominator becomes the number so massive, it's nearly impossible to comprehend.
Where is your, so you stated that when you first started this, your belief was 0, as I'm sure most people's would be. But as you start uncovering all this, right now, if I put you on the spot, where's your percentage?
It's a high degree of probability that he's a monster.
Because you go ahead.
Well, I was saying, let's consider the counter argument. All right, because that's how you have to do when you're testing the data. You're testing your hypotheses.
Well, the first thing, I was actually talking to my wife, and the first thing she said was, well, how do you know it's him? It could be a band member. I'm like, all right, true, valid point. Has he had the same band this whole time? Possibly, but unlikely. I don't know that. Do you?
No. I believe that Matt was able to speak with one of the roadies. However, there's no indication that, I can't prove or disprove whether or not the support staff have been the same over the course of a 20-year period. Remember, you've got tours from 93, but you also have tours from 2017.
Exactly. And not everybody's doing all that kind of.
Yeah, so he's the one common denominator between that entire spectrum is Garth. And so, here's the counter argument that I prepared. So, given the disturbing behavioral traits that Garth has exhibited, let's assume he's one of 5 creepazoids present in any town that would be considered a suspect who fit the profile. Okay? That means he has an 80% chance of not being the offender. After 3 of these coincidences, Garth has a 50% chance of being innocent. At 20 coincidences, however, Garth has a 99% chance of being the offender. Even without taking into consideration the 100 plus missing persons and only focusing on the 80 plus unalivings, the chance of Garth being innocent is 1.76 times 10 to the minus 8. Again, we're talking basically a number that's 1 in a million. We're not asserting a simple correlation. I'm demonstrating a mathematically increasing probability. This is the power of utilizing Bayesian statistics. It's not about finding a smoking gun. It's about the cumulative power of hundreds of data points. Individually, each piece of evidence might be easily dismissed. One coincidence proves nothing. But when you apply a Bayesian approach, each new piece of data acts as a statistical multiplier. The Bayesian model shows with mathematical precision that the seemingly absurd idea of Garth being a serial offender is not only plausible, but on the evidence, frighteningly probable. Like the data viewed through this rigorous lens paints a picture that is impossible to ignore. When we combine all of the evidence to draw a Bayesian inference, the updated probability of Garth's innocence shrinks to a number so small it's virtually indistinguishable from zero.
Wow. And to top all that off, now with podcasts and other people covering this, now with the book that you and Mr. Cox have written or co-written, if he decides, and I'm sure he's seeing some of this, or at least people are telling him about it in some fashion. If now he decides, all right, maybe the heat's getting turned up, I'm going to back off and stop, which is hard for, some serial unalivers to do. That's very difficult. Although it has been done. BTK stopped for quite a while. We're still not 100% sure on the Zodiac, but he either stopped or got incarcerated for something else or died, but seemingly he stopped. So it's not totally uncommon. But if he just did decide to hang it up, it can be just written off as he's retiring from singing, which was his cover from doing all this. So even there's not too many red flags raised from the outsider's perspective.
Sure. And well, look, at this point, Garth is in his 60s. And one of the lessons learned from the law enforcement expert is oftentimes that the serial offenders, they will age out. Those that aren't apprehended drop a testosterone. At some point, they're not that rambunctious, hellraiser that they were when they were younger. And so the investigation into the theory, however, was looking at that essentially 20-year data set.
Right.
And so for me, like the likelihood of all these seemingly unrelated events being coincidences is, according to the laws of probability, so astronomically small that it effectively eliminates the possibility of Garth being innocent. And that was the take-home point of the manuscript. And so when I presented all of this over to the co-author, that's when he's like, wow, yeah. Because now we've got a statistical basis bolstering the psychological anomalies, which are consistent and bolstering with the circumstantial. And so taken together, these three elements, they form a very serious case that, warrants someone digging deeper.
Yeah. And even when you go look at like the home life, right? He's married to Trisha Yearwood, who was another pretty prominent country singer, very, very famous in her own right. So one can say, well, you got a famous wife, you're going to be spending a lot of time with her. Well, that could be to the contrary, because she could also be touring and she could always be doing things to further her career. But just because you're married doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do that, because a number of these killers that we've mentioned throughout the past were married. BTK was married, had kids. I mean, so this isn't out of the realm of a possibility just because you're married and you have kids. And I think, I don't know that she would travel to every tour that he ever went to with him. Now, she did the one that I mentioned earlier in Charleston. It was actually a duet tour. So she sang and then he come out, they did a few songs together. So they toured together, which I'm sure made them more money, but I don't know if that's always been the case throughout all these tours.
Well, there was one of the tours, like you said, indicated was a duet tour. Other ones, however, you understand, like he had 2 residencies in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And part of his arrangement with the casinos was that he used the casino jet essentially. Yeah. So he'd fly out to Vegas, stay in Vegas for 3 days, come back. Well, she wasn't involved with many of those appearances.
Right.
And so there's a number of the unalivings taking place and disappearances taking place in Las Vegas, coinciding with his appearances there.
Wow.
Also, there was a surge essentially of unalivings and disappearances when he moved to Nashville. And then there was an increase when he moved to Oklahoma after he retired. And he had that stretch where he was living in Oklahoma, and then he moved back with Trisha Yearwood. And so we've identified a number of these circumstances which are part of that probabilistic assessment that we've created in order to draw these, what are essentially Bayesian inferences.
So Vegas to Nashville to Oklahoma, everywhere he goes, there's a surge in these cases. you can't overlook that, man. I don't care how much you brush this off, like you can't overlook that. It's impossible.
They like I said, they have, I think, well, at this point, it's still more of the younger TikTok crowd creating the videos, but hopefully at some point, someone will take a look at this, at least, you know, poke holes in the math.
Right.
Because in the end, I'm not saying the guy is a serial unaliver. I'm simply presenting a mathematical conclusion.
Right.
And now the burden shifts. And, we're waiting to hear from the other camp.
And that's another thing I feel like we should mention is with all this going on, you look at all the stuff that was says about P. Diddy in the news. He's filing lawsuits against anybody and everybody that said anything to damage his name, his credibility, his brand, if you will. Garth, now granted, he's not in the same situation as Diddy, but Garth has done nothing in lieu of lawsuits or legal actions for any of this. What do you make of that?
Well, that was another one of the factors that weighed in favor of the hypothesis being valid, because a person normally in that type of a circumstance, particularly, a very prominent celebrity, would sue Tom Segura for the purposes of trying to protect his reputation. Well, in the past 7 years, Garth has undertaken no legal action whatsoever. Even more suspicious is not only does he not sue Segura, but when I was doing this research, he hadn't even taken down the post on his social comments. It's like, here's a man who is not doing anything to draw any attention to this issue. Because if he were to sue Segura, of course, that's going to be an enormous spotlight, but now he's going to be subjected to discovery. They're going to have complete access to his travel records. They're going to have complete access to financial records. It's a circumstance that I think he's been trying to avoid.
Right. And like you said, when you do that, you do open yourself up to a lot of things that if you did have anything to hide, you definitely don't want coming to light or being in the public eye.
Yep. Look, basically his inaction is a tacit admission of guilt. Like Garth, in effect, is just trapped by his own fame.
It's it's a wild situation, man, but it's one of them things that, like, I wonder if anybody has ever done the data on someone else other than Garth. Like, did anybody do this on Elvis Presley or Marilyn Manson? Did anybody tap into any sort of data with that? And that would be, I guess, one of the arguments that you could make to go against this. Because I think in the beginning you said that, or maybe it was on the episode where Rogan, where it said you could do this with anybody. But like you said, the numbers still don't lie. Wherever he goes,
Yeah, of course. Sure. And so, like, he performs at the Super Bowl, an incident in Los Angeles. He appears at the Country Music Awards, incident in Nashville. He appears at another country show up in New York, incident. And so it's the common denominator behind all of these disparate, unrelated events is Garth.
So do you think he would be acting solely 100% alone, or would he have someone help him?
I haven't taken a look at that, and I don't think Garth would be willing to trust anybody.
Yeah.
Only because he has such an enormous amount to lose. Like one of the things when I was on home confinement, Matt and I were bouncing around ideas, and Matt came up with this notion that, he got an enormous settlement in his divorce with his first wife.
He got a settlement.
No, she did. Excuse me. He got hit with an enormous settlement. And Matt was actually saying, you know what? She might know something. Because it was like, $100+ million type of, it wasn't your standard. It was like, an enormous amount of money.
Yeah.
And so, Matt was postulating like maybe she knows, or maybe, she caught him doing something crazy, maybe wearing like a, like the Buffalo Bill character wearing a skin outfit in the mirror. Like, we don't know, but
puts the lotion on the skin. Puts the record on the player. I mean, that's not far fetched. I mean, people get paid off for a lot less crazy things.
And so again, I didn't consider that in my analysis only because it's something that I couldn't quantify.
Right.
Whereas some of the other investigators haven't treated it, I think, the way that I have. I wanted to keep it more objective as opposed to going off half cocked because I already knew this is already, you're on thin ice with investigating the allegations.
Oh yeah, not to mention the fans. Like you're going to have everybody that's immediately going to flock to his side and be, oh, you're crazy, you're this, you're that. Not him. But theoretically, when you look back, those types of people that can control the masses are some of the ones that are, capable of doing this because they know they can control the people. And you've sent me this clip, and we're going to insert it here, and I'll probably use it as a short as well. But I believe it's Crook and Chase, but I'm not sure. He's on a talk show and he says, which is very strange and out of character for a country music talk show, where he said, I'd rather just go kill somebody.
This is just who I am. So if this is truly a conversation, then I say let the conversation begin.
Oh,
No, you don't want to be a bad guy. No. I mean, you look like a good guy,
Okay, I guess I'd rather kill somebody.
Oh, you would?
That'd be fun. Sure.
Oh, so he must have this hidden mean streak that we can't see.
Yeah. Well, yes, of course. Well, he also exhibited a desire to, assuming he appears in movies, he wants to be the bad guys.
Yeah.
And the host is like, that's inconsistent with how you're, projected.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, no. I'd rather be a bad guy. I'd rather be out there unaliving people. And it's like, and, part of the analysis that Segura made, which is like they break down all of Garth's videos.
Yeah.
And, people would think, well, how's he been able to get away with this for so long? You have to understand, we're talking about events, many of which happened, Garth didn't get on social media until, less than a decade ago.
Yeah.
So you had literally 20 years where he didn't have to contend with the current media landscape.
Yeah.
And so when he does appear on many of his episodes on social media, really show just how, and you hate to say it, almost like kind of creepy he comes off. Like he comes off as very disingenuous.
He does.
He looks, it's like the carefully crafted image, the fake crocodile tears. It's like, dude, what are you doing? And of course, and you have the one admission where he flat out gave you a brief moment insight into his character when he told the host that he'd rather be out there unaliving people.
Yeah, there was another one where he was like talking to the camera and saying he was going to be doing all these clips and they were going to be real and raw and slick. And for someone that can essentially hold a crowd of tens of thousands of people in the palm of their hand and have them just waiting on every lyric of a song, he's not a person that can, in the wrestling business, they call it cutting a promo, like that can just talk and have you captivated. He's almost like where someone talks and they're stumbling and fumbling for words and they're trying to put something together that makes you uncomfortable listening to them, if that makes any sense. That's the vibe I got when I was trying to hear or listen to what he was saying about him making his presence on social media. And look, he's an older guy. This is new technology. I'm sure he's trying to learn it, but still, you think with somebody that's had that much interaction with the public and being in the public eye would learn how to talk a little bit better. It's very strange.
It's a lack of an ability to connect emotionally,
which could lead to
which is part of the psychological anomalies that we contemplated, because it's different when it's a packaged presentation. What he's saying on stage has already been prepared. It's the inability to connect at the moment unless it's pre-planned, which dovetails back in not only with the empathy related issues, but also the control issues, because it's not often that you see him putting himself out like this. And I think he's actually curtailed his more spontaneous interactions because they have it drives a lot of the suspicion.
Yeah. 100%. Does he have kids?
Sure, of course.
I didn't know if he had kids or not.
Yes.
Interesting stuff, man. Where can people go to get a hold of this book if they want to read this entire thing?
Well, on Amazon.
Amazon. Is it audio yet? Is it hardback, paperback?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we're gonna put links in the show notes to all this. What is obviously I know Cox wanted to write this because I know he got a joy and a kick out of writing it. What do you think he stands on this, on the percentage of Garth possibly being a serial unaliver?
It's difficult to discern only because he's such a huge country music fan, and two, he loved Garth's music.
Yeah.
And so
everybody did. I did. I mean, it's hard not to if you listen to music.
He was torn. Like when I would present him with the statistical analysis, I'd tell him, "Look, this isn't my opinion. The conclusion is a mathematical model. Like don't fight me. It's the numbers." And what started off for him as more of some satire actually became more serious as the numbers began to build up. And I saw his appearance on Danny Jones's podcast,
right?
And like one of his clips has gone completely viral, like millions of views.
Yeah.
And several of them have gone so, but one in particular where he was breaking down how he came to perceive Garth as a monster, which for him, it was a huge journey. Whereas for me, I'm just an outsider guy from LA, never had nothing to do with country music. To me, I literally had no baseline of pre-knowledge about Garth.
You're just looking at the facts. He's looking at the facts, but also trying to weigh the fact that he's been a fan of this guy all this time, and he's seeing him in a light of, this country megastar. Now you're having to transform that into something evil and sinister.
Sure. And, and he had the same experience you did where he's now going back and reviewing lyrics and reviewing songs.
I mean, when you start to do that and you look at the name of some of these songs, Standing Outside the Fire, I mean, it's it's really, really eerie because until you break it down and you put it in context like this, you would never think about anything like that. But now when you put it in, I know Jess. What does Jess think about this? Have you talked to her? I bet she hates it. I'm just, I don't know. I was telling my wife about this show, what we were going to be doing. She's looking forward to it because like you said, to most people, it's a gag. It is what it is. But if you actually listen and you actually listen to the facts that you put together, and you're very well spoken as always. And I love having you on the show because, I don't have to do a whole lot of work. You come with facts, you kick it out straight, and it's easy for everybody to understand. You can't ignore these things. And I encourage everybody, don't take our word for it. Go out, purchase the book. We're going to put the link in the show notes at the bottom. Go out, give it a listen, order it. Amazon, Goodreads. It's not, how many pages is it? It's not very long, is it?
About 40,000 words.
Yeah. So, I mean, easy word. You knocked out on a plane trip, and let us know in the comments what you think about Garth. I mean, serial unaliver or not, he's still going to get some play in my radio when I'm feeling the country music thing. It's hard not to. But other heroes have fallen in the music business. Look at R. Kelly, look at Puff Daddy. You never know. We might be sitting there 10 years from now and they realize that Garth has done everything we've spoken about. Who knows?
All right.
Well, Pete, man, as always, it was a pleasure having you on, my friend. Definitely appreciate it. Everybody will put his Instagram as well. Go check him out. He's got a lot of good stories. We've done a lot of stories together in the past on crime and entertainment. Pete, we appreciate you stopping by the show, my friend.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you.